Hi, good afternoon. Great to be here and talk about the M&A trends in mobile gaming. M&A is certainly something I have great passion for. I started about 11 years ago in investment banking. There was a time, some of you might remember, when ringtones were the hottest thing in town. And I was fortunate enough to work on a few browser-based transactions and mobile gaming transactions. And I always had this thought that eventually that industry, which was in those days growing like crazy, when Zynga was growing, when Japanese companies like DNA and Gree came from Japan to the US market, I always had the thought that eventually the industry needs to consolidate. Right? Eventually the big companies, they move in and they buy a lot of smaller studios and they all bring them together. And that was really attractive to me. And about a year and a half ago, I had the chance to join the corporate development team at Gree, where I take care of the M&A and investment business. And I thought that's consolidation. That's going to be interesting for us. But what I found out during the first month with Gree, that the market has actually changed a lot. So a few weeks ago, I read Wall Street Journal and came across the headline "Record Spending on Video Games," which is great, right? It's when the Wall Street Journal and Bloomberg write about our industry, that's always flattering. But only like literally a few days later, I saw this article saying mobile has become an indie hostile environment. And I thought, how could there be this consolidation? How could that work out? Somehow this didn't fit together, right? So I guess it's always a good start to look at the macro picture. And overall, in the Western world, our industry is growing. If we look at the revenues year over year, it's a 30% growth, which is awesome. I mean, there are not a lot of industries in the world growing 30% at that revenue volume we have in mobile gaming. But if you look at the volume of downloads, for the last 2.5 years, downloads been flat, even slightly declining, which basically means that it's harder to get the app, the game, in front of the gamer, but the games which are played, they seem to make much more money. Then looking a little bit deeper into the drivers of the industry, there's been or has been a shift in the underlying drivers, especially if we look at production cost. 3-4 years ago, a production budget of $1 million, $500,000 to $1 million was enough to bring a competitive game into the market. Today, a budget of 10-20 million is not an exception anymore. UA, I think we all been talking about that for a long time. User acquisition is super expensive, has been increasing. Today, it's about, I guess, roughly you need 20 million to bring a title up in the top 100 grossing charts. If you think 5-10 million to produce a title, and then you need another at least 20 million to buy marketing for the title to bring it up, it's quite a lot of money. So as a consequence, LTV requirements, basically monetization, is much more important, and a game needs to monetize much better than it did years ago. Plus, live ops is awesome because now our games, they last maybe 7+ years. Years ago, we thought a game lasts 1 to 2 years. But on the flip side, you need a team which operates the game. So that all in all means there are really high barriers to entry in the mobile gaming industry, which was not the case years ago. And this seems to be a sign for a very mature market. So if we look at the number of titles which come out in a year and make it in the top 1,000, we see in 2014 there were around, I think, 180 titles which came out in 2014 and made it in the top 1,000. If you look at 2016, only about 100 titles made it in the top 1,000. The same pattern holds for the top 500, the top 250. But again, on the flip side, we're in a growing industry, right, which is awesome. The number of games which makes more than 5 million a year increased from only 70 in 2014 to about 150 this year. So overall, the opportunity is there. Then the question is, how does this consolidation play out? And to find an answer to that, we try to find a theoretical framework. It's always good to have a framework which guides you through a new territory. And we looked at two concepts, right? We looked at the industry life cycle, which is a concept Michael Porter wrote a lot about, and everybody in the audience who went to business school probably had read some books of Michael Porter. And we looked at the console market. Console market is a few years ahead of our mobile gaming industry and has similar characteristics. So looking at the industry life cycle, every industry basically goes through that cycle. It's the same, like a new industry, new trend is introduced. It's very early. You have a lot of startups. You have a lot of VC activity. It's something where the VR industry or market is right now. That industry then follows a growth pattern where you see the PE funds, the growth investors jumping in. You see the first leaders emerging, and then a shakeout happens, and then the market goes into maturity, where a few large players own that market, and eventually an industry declines. If you look at the console space, pretty much, consoles have also very high barriers to entry. Production cost is extremely high. In the early 2000s, we had a vast marketplace of console developers. And if you look at the names, I think a lot of names are familiar to you guys. Fast forward, right now, there are 10 large players in the console market. Consoles are very similar in a way to mobile gaming, because in addition to the high barriers to entry with production costs, you have two distribution channels, right? You have an Xbox and the PlayStation. We have Google and Apple. I don't think it in our mobile industry will be that extreme that we end up with 5, 10 large players, but I think the trend here is the trend is quite obvious. So maturity is kind of the name of the game right now. And then how does that concept works with the M&A environment? When we look at the transactions, all the deals which happened in the last 12 months, we basically can see like 3 types of deals which happened, and we think that those deals will also happen in the next, those types of deals happen in the next few years. The first type of deal is large stage consolidation, right? So again, back to the Wall Street Journal headline, first half of this year, almost 19 billion of deal volume in our industry. Awesome, right? That's why I'm in mobile gaming, to do M&A deals, right? But then when we look under the hood, we see it's pretty much 80% of that volume is due to 3 transactions, and it's mainly King and Supercell acquisition, right? So looking at those, the high end, the top end of the market, those deals, we can learn 2 things. Valuations in that part of the market is like 3-4 times top line revenues and 6 to 9, 10 times EBITDA. And also the motivation for the buyers. And for those transactions, it's basically M&A is used to own a market, right? To move in and own the casual genre with King, or be the largest player in strategy with Supercell. The second type is what we call the mid-market, right? Mid-market transactions, somewhere 20 to 100 million, and those deals are used to build portfolios. But also those deals, if we look at the last 6-12 months, hasn't been a land grab. It's very strategic, a few very strategic acquisitions, and here it's a portfolio management approach, right? It's the buyer either wants to move into a new genre or wants to consolidate a genre the buyer is already in. We see that in casual with Ubisoft, want to go into casual with ketchup. The social casino world, probably the most advanced genre with those type of deals, and also midcore. We as GRI, we love RPG games. Knights and Dragons has been a successful title for us. We wanted to be stronger, so we acquired Dragon Soul. Looking at the valuations, you see something like around 2 times revenues, 6 to 7 times EBITDA is kind of the average across those deals. And comparing that to the large deals in the market, smaller deals, they basically trade with a little bit of a discount. But similar to public listed companies, the multiples are not much higher than 2 times revenues, around that. And then the last type of deals are basically like deals to build a studio structure, right? Also here hasn't been a land grab that one company bought 5, 6, 7 smaller studios. Here it's also super selective. What you see here, which is very interesting, the teams which got acquired are high quality, and they very often already know the buyer. Like if you look at Flare Games, they published a Non-Stop Night. They had a relationship, and then out of that relationship, a deal happened. So it's also not the big land grab opportunity. It's more like buying strong teams and build a studio structure and hedge the bets of the in-house development. Valuations in that part of the market, it's hard to value that. How do you value a company without KPIs and without revenues or EBITDA? It's more like wheeling and dealing and using deal structures you see in publishing deals, where you have a small upfront commitment to give the studio enough capital to run, and then very often there's a revenue share or like a profit share. So overall, the M&A market, the M&A and trends, that follows like where we are in the life cycle. We're in a mature market. It's not a market anymore where VCs come in and it's much harder to start new studios up from the ground because of the high barriers to entry, but there's still a lot of opportunity. I think the biggest opportunity is for developers with concentrated bets. Yes, investment, the few we see, and M&A is selective, but companies which focus on one thing and one thing only don't come up with a +1 or fast following strategy, but have something innovative. They are interesting because in the Western world, deals are highly strategic. And for the smaller studios, what's important for the smaller studios, it's being super focused and have a track record and KPIs. And you see, like what we see in the Western market, what we heard earlier from Jim and the others on the Chinese market, it's very similar. The consolidation happens in the top end of the market, and it is very numbers driven. But the opportunity is there because we saw earlier the market is growing, and if a company makes it in this rough market and launches a title which makes it in the top charts, then the opportunity is actually bigger than it has ever been before. Thanks.
So you're saying you have to be really good to be eligible for an acquisition.
Yeah, it's quite tough, and you see it with the volume of deals. There are not many, so the company needs to have something outstanding to fit the strategic need of the buyer.
So, if I'm already passing some entry standard for an acquisition, I am competitive in this crazy market. Why wouldn't I try and make it on my own?
That's always an option, right? I think it's there are benefits of larger organizations in that market. Also, when a studio has one successful hit, for example, or one successful game somewhere in the top 100 grossing or 250, that's a good sign. But then the question is, like, with the market barriers to entry increasing, and competition is getting stronger and stronger, doesn't it make more sense to jump on a larger platform and use those economics of scale, right, with being with a larger company?
All right. Yes, question.
So you mentioned portfolio extension as a kind of one of the driving factors in making acquisitions. Are the bigger companies looking to diversify their portfolios with different types of games, or are they trying to basically double down on the games that they have become specialists in making, and then bring their expertise to maybe titles that have more potential but haven't been developed the best way?
I think it's a very, very interesting question because I can tell you what we see in the market, and we agree. We spend a lot of time thinking about that. I think from our perspective, it's you first have to own the market you're in, right? If you're not competitive in your own genre, then adding a new genre to it, like in our case, for example, we are a mid-core studio, right? We know mid-core well. All our internal structures are from game development to marketing, live ops is optimized for mid-core, right? So we need to be strong in mid-core first before we can think of, let's go to casual or in another genre. And I think and you see that in the market as well, as once a company is big enough and owns a genre, then there's room to add a new genre to it. But it's similar to discussions we heard earlier with smaller studios. If you're not good at what you do, it's hard to add something new. And the same is true for larger strategic companies, strategic buyers.
All right, Sebastian, thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.